Welcome to Leapcast. I'm your host, Dr. George James. Leap stands for leaders, entertainers, athletes, and performers. And I'm on a journey to connect with high achievers and highlight their unexamined human moments. Tune in to learn how these high-achieving Leap individuals were able to reach their greatest potential, face their most difficult challenges, and embrace the human moments that helped them along the way. If you want to get the episode highlights directly in your email, then head to theleapcast.com right now to subscribe. Well, welcome everybody. This is Dr. George James, and welcome to Leapcast, where we talk to leaders, entertainers, athletes, and performers. I'm excited for our guest today, Dr. Stephen Treat, somebody I've known for many years, probably over 21 years. He is someone that if you've heard me at any point talk about one of my mentors, he's definitely the person that I talk about the most in that category. So with that, Dr. Treat, Steve, thanks for joining me today on Leapcast.
What a privilege.
So one of the things that we like to start off with is being able to talk about your Leap story, which is really about your early days, your beginning of your career and process. And so I guess we want to learn more about those beginning days. Like, how did you even, what was maybe home life or early school, or even your first trajectory? How did it all start for you?
Well, I grew up in a middle class white family, but I say that because there were no Catholics in the neighborhood, no Jewish people in the neighborhood. It was only Protestant in the neighborhood. A very kind of segregated kind of life in Connecticut, and very sheltered and kind of very naive. I had a learning disability in school, so they had some complications with reading, and it was kind of a very sheltered life. And if you looked at some of the decisions I've made over my lifetime, it's all been to kind of combat that. And, I'll give you little pieces of it as we went along, and whatever. But I suppose some of the most compelling stuff was, every kid needs a ticket at some level, and it doesn't really matter so much what the ticket was. And the ticket for me was tennis in the very earliest years. I became pretty good at it at 5th and 6th grade. And by 12 or 13, I was one of the best in my age brackets and playing tennis. I started to build my identity around being a good athlete. And that was just a really good thing, because I wasn't going to build it around being a great academician at that time. That happened a little bit later. I felt a little better about myself, but trying to be a good athlete, and being a good athlete helped me out a lot, and gave me some opportunities to become a little more independent. 16, 17, 18 years old, gave me some opportunities to meet different people, and that was a really good piece.
21 years I've known you, and I don't think I knew that you were such a tennis pro. So
well, it was back today. I play just good club tennis, so to speak. But I taught for 4 years. I actually allowed me to become financially independent, so could break away from my own family a little bit in terms of that. But the compelling part about my own upbringing was it was very, very female dominated. My dad was relatively not present. He came out of some pretty rough background that was very, very, very complicated background. A lot of alcoholism back in his family and kinds of things. And my mother was dominant. I had an older sister who was dominant. I had a younger sister who was dominant. And so a lot of that, kind of helped me frame my own life a little bit, because it was kind of interesting. The thing I most disliked about my father was that he could emote, and he could feel, and he could share, and he could cry kind of almost on an instant. And it took me till about my middle 20s to recognize that exactly what my father had is what I needed. If you follow me, because I figured out how to work hard, just progress, just become a type A personality and get good at what I did. But had a lot of insecurities as it went along. But this changed. It grew some. I recognized pretty early on that I was brought up in the church, and I was brought up going to church every Sunday, going to see my grandparents. After that, a little bit, George, like with your folks, and I grew up going to church and going to my grandfather's house for dinner every Sunday. And I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go into the ordained ministry. And
How early on did you know that?
I probably started to consider it in ninth grade, 10th grade,
Okay.
that I really thought I'd go in. I thought I'd go to the ministry, and I knew I wanted to work. I knew I wanted to do some kind of social work, some kind of work with people. I know I wanted to work in the community. And I knew I wanted to kind of spread and broaden by leaps and bounds the experience I had as a kid. I figured that out early on. So I did volunteer work even early on in that in inner city Hartford, and just trying to broaden my own leap. But the ministry was really the place where I grew up. Um,
Was that
there's
like
this wonderful
common
thing.
for your family to think about ministry or go beyond like the sheltered experience?
Well, Elizabeth, I met Elizabeth in my senior year, excuse me, my sophomore year in college, and we got married in our junior year. So my going to the ministry was very much of a conversation we were having with each other. And I said, we're going to live a life that, we're not going to have a lot of nickels. And, it's going to be, a lot of sacrifice and, a long time. And she was totally for it because she also grew up in the church, and did it. And she always wanted to be a teacher. So that was pretty profound. So we talked a lot about it. But I did most of my growing up after we had met, which is an interesting thing to do. And so did Elizabeth, because the old line in psychology of you kind of marry someone at your own level of differentiation. Um, I definitely did that. We were both kids when we got married, and but we grown together. We're having our 50th wedding anniversary in a
Wow.
couple of months, so kind of thing. But CPE in as part of CPE is clinical pastoral education, as part of my ministry to get ordained, and that's where I started to first confront myself, and as you said, made a real leap. I started to like myself, recognize some of my history, integrate some of my own past, look at some of the good and the bad of my life, and that really was profound for me. I did all my intern work for 2 years, 3 years in Boston City Hospital,
Mm.
and there was nothing you didn't see in Boston City Hospital.
Yeah.
So, and of course, as you did, George, you met so many people along the way that were your teachers. I had mentors, people that really mentored me, but I had so many teachers, just
Mm.
people that just met me in a moment and just could just confront me in certain ways that I would learn and
Oh
grow.
yeah, I've definitely had some of those.
You know what I mean? And so that was great. So one of the great leaps in my life was, I decided pretty early on, probably 22, 23, that I wanted to do something. This is going to seem strange, the language, but I wanted to only do things that were intrinsically meaningful. Because for about a year and a half, I did some work in between all these to help pay for school, um, that I hated every day going to work.
Mm.
So it's what you call extrinsic meaning, because then you get paid and you could do something intrinsically meaningful. But I decided that I wanted my work forever to be intrinsically meaningful. And that has really formed my life, because I've almost only done things that doing them was the benefit. And if I got paid for it, that was nice, and nice to have, and nice to be able to raise a family and pay for educations and whatever. But I really made a very early decision to do things intrinsically meaningful.
How did you make that
After working,
decision? I mean, at 20 something, that's not necessarily normal for 20 something year olds to be thinking about intrinsic meaning and value and
yep,
purpose even.
yep, yep. Well, I do think now that I've got maturity with my dad and gave up some of the anger, that I recognize that he lived a lot of his life like that,
Mm.
where he was never very productive, and he never really quite figured out how to really, in his own mind, be a success. He was quite a success if I think about it, because he did those intrinsically meaningful things all the time. He ran, our family business at that time was a sporting goods store when I was growing up. And
Mm.
it was a big sporting goods store, and he did things like start, um, I forget what the actual term was for, started baseball leagues, for elementary school kids, in inner city Hartford. And all he had to do was go to the store and pick up 15 bats and, 50 gloves. And,
Yeah.
so I watched him do this kind of thing, which at the time, when I was a child, I was more critical of. He wasn't earning more money or doing more,
Mm.
kind of things like some of the neighbors were. But I learned that was really kind of the essence a pretty deep life. So that's something I've done. I've only done intrinsically meaningful things. Really, you know, right up to today, what I'm doing with you right now, or when somebody asks me to do something, uh, that if it's something that I'm not going to really enjoy doing at some level or find meaningful, I did it. So that was a huge leap in my life along those lines.
And I appreciate you sharing that. And two things, I think about my own journey with my father. It was really after losing my father that I was able to fully grasp those other parts, right? Like I think like there was some uh, frustration that he didn't make as much money or didn't do as much.
Yep.
But it is in his passing that I recognize how much he instilled in me around entrepreneurship or hope
Exactly.
or optimism that I
Exactly.
value so much in my life.
Exactly. Exactly.
And when you talk about intrinsic meaning, like there definitely been some times where I've made decisions or choices because of what the extrinsic value would be, what I'm going to get paid. But I've definitely felt more rewarded, happy, at peace when it was more intrinsic, when it was more of like part of who I am, or brought some meaning for me. So it's great that you've been able to kind of shape your life and career from that. It sounds like from a really early age, being able to do that.
And you think of the teaching you're doing now, the lots of teaching you're doing now, and some of the courses for the audience that I once taught, and you're teaching most of those courses and whatever. And I watch you teach, and it's so it's tough, and you have to do it 15 weeks in a row. But when you're there in front of those students, there's no part of you that's thinking about anything else but the joy of that, and the
Yeah,
mentoring of those kids, and having them come up. And it's fun to watching you as a leader in that field. So I think that
appreciate
stuff's
that.
great.
So as
So
you mentioned,
if you
go ahead.
take the intrinsic meaning stuff, and you take the my growing into just broadening my life from that very sheltered upbringing, and then you add Elizabeth to my life, for very married very early, and we just had complicated times in the beginning because we just didn't have the maturity to talk well, share well, say what we needed, whatever, and we had to kind of struggle for the first couple of years to figure out. We didn't have much money, and no one, no one backing us up, paying for school and whatever. And but the growing together, us growing together, and us growing as a team, and has been another transforming, leaping experience for me, because we didn't get married like my daughter, gets married at 32 and already has a career and a life and most of her education done. We My wife and I were in school the entire upbringing of our two older sons.
Wow.
So, when they were 15 and 16, somebody would say, who has an exam today? And any one of us could raise our hands because we were
All
just doing
four of us,
graduate school.
any
Anyone
four
could
of
go.
us.
So it created a wonderful kind of meaningful place. And then, Emily, my daughter, came out, 15 years later. And by that time, our life was a little bit different, and also a great experience. But between Elizabeth transforming my life and kind of growing together and being intimate with her and figuring out how to kind of share a life, and the kids, uh, I'll give you another transforming piece. A leap was, I went from being a transactional father and somebody who was too busy to kind of spend a lot of time in the really early years with them, because I was just so busy trying to survive, to being a much better father over time, spending time on the floor, spending time with them, playing with them. Um, just, I learned not to teach them, and they transformed my life also, because they were great with me. They would challenge me, but in really almost always in good ways, and mostly to say, "Hey, Dad, we can do this now. We're okay. We have this handled." And when I listened to that and just got quiet, they did have it handled. And those elements were incredibly transforming and meaningful. So it's I mean, that brings you up to when I went to the council, basically.
And
You
I'm
know,
definitely going to come back to the time of you going to council. I want to go back a little bit. As you've shared with me before, so I know some of this. But early on in school, having to navigate, some of those challenges. I remember you talking about strabismus, and I've learned that from other people. And I guess I'm wondering, like, how did you navigate those early challenges as a person, as a young boy, to to move forward, and then to play tennis at such a high level? So, like, how
Mhm.
did you do all of that?
My first answer is I don't know. Uh, it helps when you have, there's a wonder of consistency in my upbringing of a mom who loved me very much, a father who loved me very much, couldn't quite demonstrate it in certain ways, but I knew I was very secure in that. I never had to worry about what I was going to eat or if there was a roof over my head. Um, we lived in neighborhoods at the time, and that was a huge piece of my life. I mean, this idea that the way we raise our children in the end, and how children are, my grandchildren are being raised now. I mean, we simply had 15 friends in the 4 or 5 houses to my left and right, and 4 or 5 houses across the street, and we would just play all the time and whatever. So that was a very foundational, wonderful way of being. Um, while to say just the strabismus is my eyes worked independently, and so I couldn't read well. I was not a fast reader. I did internalize that. If I'm not smart enough, I'm not. And of course, I had an older sister who was brilliant and mother that was very smart and whatever. But they never, um, they did well with that. They never compared. They say, Steve, you can do it. You're going to be fine. My mother thought more of me than I thought of me, which was really, again, a leap, if you follow me,
Hmm.
because if she thought less of me than I thought of me, she
Yeah.
would have had to go pretty low. But as she always felt more of me. So she gave me something to strive for in terms of that. She always had more, uh, she had more confidence in me than I had in myself, which actually helped me move forward a lot. I did things that, I was able to go for, I started hiking very early on, and I was allowed to go hiking just with a couple of friends at the age of 14, 15, to the point of dad, my father would drop us off, and a week later, 100 miles away, he'd say, be here if you can, be here, 7 days from now. And that's what we do. You
Now
follow me
this
up
is
at 100
just
miles.
for everybody. This is before cell phones, before GPS tracking devices. They're just gonna
Exactly.
pick you up on 100 miles down the road.
Yeah, we'd go up on the long trail up in Vermont, or we'd go up to the White Mountains, and we'd camp. And so they gave me resources to create a lot of confidence in myself. You don't do that stuff without building confidence. So they didn't overprotect me, which was really, really a good thing that they did. So that was part of it. And other than that, I had to just kind of slowly recognize um, that I had abilities and they had smarts. And of course, it helped because when in seventh grade, I had an English teacher who said, "What is the problem here?" Do you follow me on that? Because I tested fine. I tested as a perfectly normal, smart, good person. What is the problem here? And he was the first one to really say, "There's something going on here." And then I spent a year in ophthalmology and all sorts of things. And then I had eye exercises to do, and I learned how to speed read. And then my life got a lot different. So it corrected.
Yeah.
But as you know, an early complex, an early kind of insecurity was there for a long time, which actually compelled me to go to graduate schools with an S and prove that I was smart.
Look, I know that life.
It took me
For
a long it took me a long time to integrate it, to say I'm okay,
Yeah. Yep.
and it's a nice place, but I'm there now, and I've been there for the last numbers of years, 15, 20 years, probably, but it took a long time to get there. It was a struggle, those lines. And
I
if I
think
didn't
like
have supportive parents and a loving kind of background, and another thing interesting you probably don't know about me is that I did have mentors really from like the fourth grade on, outside people in my life. I could kind of list the sequence of them, um, who made a huge impact on my life. And one of the things I give myself some credit for is I went out and found some of these mentors, and some of these mentors found me,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, it does, and I've how we got to where we are is like I fully believe that some mentors you have to go find them,
Right.
and
And
that
you're doing the same thing now for some students. You're going to do the same thing for lots of people, including their children. But just as you have a mentor that can see you differently than than you're seen, that you feel internally. That is just priceless stuff.
I think that's
Just
a really great point. Like, what you said that your parents gave you and mentors, being able to see you beyond the way you see yourself,
right,
and to constantly interact with that, to
right,
constantly interact with someone that sees you
exactly,
differently, better, greater.
exactly.
And then you start to hold on to that and to believe that. I know that I've experienced that in my own life, being around people like yourself who
Yep,
saw me better, greater,
yep,
and then you started to kind of to fill in those shoes, right? You start to
yep,
like walk in those shoes that they've
yep,
set for you, and it becomes this really great like prophecy for your life and where
yeah.
you can go. It's really great.
And it was a role Elizabeth played too, my wife. I mean, played, I've told you the story, but that I get this call on a random Wednesday night to see if I wanted to become the CEO of the council for relationships, where we all trained, and big job and big this. And it was because some other things had failed in terms of leadership there, and whatever. And I'm debating loud and clear of whether I'm smart enough, capable enough to do it. My wife said a few expletives, and what are you talking about? It kind of slapped me around a little bit. And I said, well, of course you're going to take it. So, and all of a sudden you take it and you can do it. So I've had a lot of people to help me with some of that, uh, some of the some of the difficulties of those earlier times. But look, every day I'm blessed because the difficulties I had are nothing compared to when I watch the news today or
Mm.
work at some of the places I do volunteer work. I mean, but it's still in my own version of it. It
Yeah.
was complicated to try and overcome.
And that's
Yeah,
the other part that I'm curious about. You mentioned you and Elizabeth, and now getting ready to celebrate 50 years together, which is amazing. And congratulations on that. But it's not often. I mean, that I hear people say that they get married or decided to get married in the while they were in college, and I think like you didn't even finish college yet, and
in
you're
truth,
thinking about
she had finished by the time I got married. She was a year older, so I married an older woman, so she was a year older, and uh, we did do an interesting thing right at that moment. Was we made a pact when we got married that we would trade graduate schools.
okay.
And if you know that, I would go first, then she would go, and I would go work, and then I would go, and she would go, and we did that almost completely that way. Uh, it was a real agreement that we made that we honored for the next 15 years.
Wow.
So, and if I had grown and she hadn't, or if she had grown and I hadn't, we never would have stayed married.
And that's something
Because
I've heard you say before, and to hear that is the value of growing with your partner, right? In the different
yeah,
ways, right?
yeah,
Like you said, you grew up, you started off as kids, but then you
yeah,
matured together,
yeah,
had different ways that you partnered.
exactly,
I think that's
exactly,
just so incredible because I can
exactly,
imagine for some folks that just doesn't happen where they
right,
have the pact and they follow through with the pact and they grow and
exactly.
develop along the way.
So you attribute it to hard work, but the divorce rate for people that get married at 19 and 20, is like 80-90%. And
Yeah.
the reason is not because they don't love each other. The reason is they just don't have the maturity to manage an intimacy or manage the birth of a child, or the complicated parts of trying to form a life, or that kind of thing. So
Or
I
four
found
people
myself
having
to be
exams at the same time.
exactly exactly. It was all good. It was all very good. So
So you
but
get
yeah,
this
go ahead.
So you get this opportunity as you're moving forward, right? It sounds like you're maturing yourself. You're figuring things out. You've worked through some of the internal things. You believe in
Right,
yourself more. You have a great partner,
right,
and this opportunity to run this organization comes.
yeah.
What was that like for you, and how did that impact or shift your life going forward?
Again, you can almost think back to moments of time. Like the first moment when I was asked to run it was I knew I wanted to at some level, but didn't think I had capability. So Elizabeth got me through that and said, yes, I'll say yes.
Mm.
When I was first there, B Hollander, who just mentioned B because it's a funny story. She came up to me on the first day I was CEO. I don't know if I ever told you this, but first day I was CEO, she comes up and says, we've had some difficulty with the leadership here at the council. I said, yeah, I know we have, and whatever. And she looks at me and says, you were part of the problem. Yeah. I stepped back and I started to laugh and I said, well, give me your version of that. Well, how did you see I was part of the problem? And she explained that she thought that I could have stepped up much earlier without being any title, without having any letters by my name,
Mm.
as CEO or this kind of thing. I could have stepped up much earlier in some of the leadership. And she was dead right. I mean, she was exactly correct and it was helpful. But one of the great things about the job is I had a whole bunch of people that we could be direct with each other. They could be direct with me and I could be direct with them. And we always had good intent towards each other. And these are the people that, taught you, and there's,
Yeah.
a lot, some are still there. They're all retiring, but there was an enormous amount of kind of direct feedback we had of each other. We could process our lives. So I heard the good, the bad, and the ugly of my leadership, and and they heard good and bad and ugly from my thinking about their role and different kinds of things. But it was all done in good intent, but it helped us all grow. Um,
It's interesting
another,
that.
another, I'll give you one other quick
Yeah.
story, just a momentous kind of moment in that. About 3 years into being CEO, things that were really mind setting, I went a completely different direction. So I had this wonderful feedback that helped me grow. And when I did 360s and big evaluations in the organization, I always read them out loud and would say, boy, these are the things everybody's telling me I need to grow. And I'd laugh and I'd say, that's exactly right on target, because I would always kind of try and work on that growing edge. But I was at a board meeting about 2 years into being the CEO. And I was sharing about 5 or 6 anxieties about the future of the council. Any nonprofit is hard to hold
Yeah.
up and how to go. And not huge, and we were in good shape, but I was sharing the anxieties, and the chairman of the board looked at me, and I thought he was going to talk about my anxieties and what the board could do to help and all sorts of things. But he looked at me and just said, how many people know that you're carrying these anxieties?
Mm.
And of course, the answer was no one knew.
Yeah.
Elizabeth didn't know.
Mm.
The people that are still at the council didn't know. And he said, so you're shouldering all this anxiety as an individual person. And I said, I thought that was my job, to kind of be the face of the staff to the board and the
Mhm.
face of the board to the staff, and to kind of not let anyone know that the anxieties can carry. And he said, before the next board meeting, I need you to have an executive committee of at least 5 or 6 people that you will share every one of these anxieties with, and they'll share some of their anxieties about the organization. And instead of you just carrying all the anxiety of holding this up, you're going to have 5 or 6 people that are going to carry it with you as a team. And I did that. And it actually turned out to be 8 people. I could still name them. You know them all if you follow me. And I learned how to be a much better leader there.
Yeah.
It really was transformative for me as a lead, because I stopped carrying it all by myself. And then I could give the Kens and the Aprils and the Bs and the Geralds and the people that were really good friends of mine, and just the Priscillas, all these names, and I
Yeah.
could go and say these anxieties, and they could calm me down, or they could say, yes, this is a concern, or how can we all help, and how can we all contribute? And I stopped doing that kind of solo stuff where I needed to be the person. And after that, for the next 15, 16 years, I found the whole role to be easier. I was less anxious about it. I think I was much better at it. I got better at it as we went along. Um, uh,
No, I really appreciate you highlighting that, and two things I was thinking about is that you mentioned it. I was just in a conversation yesterday with a client about 360s and how they happen, and it sounds like you were able to do that early on, but you also had a group of people that there was trust there. And
yeah,
sometimes in lots of companies and organizations, they do 360s, and there's not necessarily trust
yeah,
amongst everybody, or
yeah,
safety even. And I can imagine that it was probably easier to hear it, to accept it, and to work on it, because there was such safety and trust amongst everybody.
yeah. I did 2 or 3 things because in the beginning there was not much trust in me as a leader. I did do 2 or 3 things with a little bit of help and wisdom that really, again, were transformative. One is I was always transparent about every nickel I made at the council, what my salary was, what it was, so that people didn't project that I was getting paid blank and this and that. And that was a really helpful thing. the other thing I did, which I don't think you know, is there's at the time the head of the council was appointing people to work with each other. In other words, if Michael ran a large paoli office, the leadership of the council appointed who he had to work with. And I learned very early on that if I let the leaders of the organization be the leaders, develop their own offices, hire their own people, I wanted some kind of little bit of oversight into that to keep some balance and diversity and some kind of larger CFR values kinds of things going. But they all built their own offices and built their own practices. And after that, we were all on a team anymore. It wasn't, my pushing someone onto someone else kind of thing. They were hiring people they wanted to work with, and the teams became, pretty close, So those two decisions were one of the things that helped build some trust. Besides the fact I would always show my 360 and read it out loud
Right.
because the feedback you got was just so accurate, about your own weaknesses. It was just so right on target. There was no like, I don't do that, and whatever. And then I always had stuff to work on.
But it takes such a great deal of vulnerability too to be able to share that in front of folks. But once again, safety and trust. And one of the things I've seen with lots of leaders and even like high achievers is that you can get to a place where it just feels isolated and alone. And so
Yeah.
when you talk about like sharing the anxieties that you had, right, that the level
Yeah.
of anxieties that you held on to, feeling like that was your role as a leader. I know there's plenty of leaders who feel that way, that
You
that's
bet.
what they're supposed to do, and they don't share, and I think it ends up hurting them
You end
along the
up
way.
getting burned out and isolated, and exactly, it's a big deal.
I think it was great that you were able to do that, and I would imagine that's some of the information or support or advice that you've given to other leaders along the way.
Mm-hmm. And I'll give you another story that was transformative. One of the things, one of my very first, I was probably in the role for about 2 years. We had about 12 support staff. And at the time, I think probably somewhere in that number. And I got some feedback from that I could figure out was from the support staff a little bit, that we didn't know how much Steve cared about us.
Hmm.
So that was like a spear going through me, because all I was trying to do was make sure the council was afloat and they all had jobs, and the work they were doing was just outstanding and whatever. But I recognized that this was really a developmental thing too. I knew how to work 80 hours a week, and I knew how to be productive, and I knew how to this, but they didn't care about any of that stuff. All they saw me do is running around the council,
Yeah.
busy, always busy. And another really transformative thing I did very early on is I started just going into each one of their offices in the morning, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, an hour, excuse me, just a couple of minutes or something. And I started to track their lives.
Hmm.
And that was also, do you know what I mean by track their lives? I knew, for instance, to ask you, how's your daughter doing, and how's it going at Abby? How's it going at school? And, how's her, how's this and that and kind of thing. I was tracking their lives. And of course, immediately they felt of worth,
Yeah.
from me, that I wasn't, that it was totally in me that I was feeling that way towards them, and very positive, and so glad they were there. But because I didn't never had the time to just track their lives a little bit, and that became one of the mantras for me in all parenting. When I spoke on that is are you tracking your own child's lives? Because tracking is one of the way we know that people feel loved.
Yeah. That you're
They
paying
feel it.
attention, right? That
Right,
you're in
right,
tune with what's
right,
happening.
right.
You know,
Your friendship and mine has been developed at some level because I track your life and you track mine.
yeah, yeah.
We can ask questions of each other and where we are in terms of that. So I see these things, and I probably have 15 more of them that I could think about, but just I see these things as things that really took my life and just by 2 or 3 degrees each time moved it in a different direction,
Yeah.
in pretty powerful ways.
Was there a moment that you felt throughout your career that one move or the other was a significant move for you that moved it multiple degrees forward?
I think the multiple degrees happened when I took over CFR, because I had to recognize that I had to recognize my ability at some level. I had to kind of transform a little bit. Birth of each child was transformative for me. But when I learned how to play with them, that was really transformative. In other words, I always was a good father and was safe and whatever, but I hadn't learned how to play with them. I hadn't really learned how to just be with them. That was transformative. Um, just currently, I mean, my semi-retirement is somewhat transformative in that I am finding downtime to be valuable.
Yeah.
That's that's probably the most transformative thing that's happening right now.
Hmm.
I never would have thought it. Most people thought I would never retire or never step back at all, you know. But as I have done that and have free time, I'm finding that I'm, able to feel more and just more in touch.
Yeah.
I'm more connected to my surroundings, and goodness knows I wish I had more of that ability when I was 30, but I'm glad to have some of it now. That's transformative for me.
Yeah.
Um,
And that makes,
I'm not scared of getting old because of it. If you follow me,
right.
I'm looking forward to my 70s and 80s and 90s. God willing, I mean, I've been able to live that long.
Wow. And that makes sense, like those moments, and how they can be transformative. And I think that, I remember, my initial interaction with you as a professor when I was uh, learning to become a therapist in my master's program, and seeing the things that you were doing, which then really was part of the encouragement for me to want to work at council. And at that point, my memory was that it seemed like you were doing a lot that seems really great. You were doing great work as a therapist. You're also doing some things in media. You were also running the organization, your
Yep.
family, all that.
Public speaking. Yep. All
Right.
that.
I'm wondering, when did that part really, like, your reach and influence start to increase, where it went beyond the room or the office, where it took on public speaking or media? When did how did you realize that that was also something you wanted to do?
So it's an interesting question. I have to think about it a little bit. The public speaking is interesting in and of itself because that started very early in my life. When it started as preaching and
Yeah.
early in life. But in ninth grade, I won the high school public speaking prize.
Oh.
So that sounds like a great story. And I'm not saying that kind of out of ego. I'm saying that because one of the things I learned very early on, my father had carried so much anxiety. He couldn't speak in front of anyone. He couldn't perform in front of anyone. He had no kind of level of security. And somehow in me that translated as I do not want to be there. So I started putting myself in front of people,
Mm.
seventh grade, eighth grade, ninth grade kind of thing. And that early decision to do that, to calm my anxiety in terms of public speaking, in terms of being in front of people, in terms of going on TV, all the things you've done, and um, not being highly anxious about, speaking in front of 500 people or something like that. That was a learned behavior that I did just by calming my anxiety down with repetition.
Mm.
Um, I suppose one of the key moments is I figured out that, and this happened a couple of times, kind of sad but funny story. Probably 3 times in my career, I was going to speak to 300 or 400 people, and I had the wrong topic. In other words, somebody's up there introducing me and saying, "We're so glad Dr. Tree's here, and he's going to be speaking on, the intimacy, marital, couple intimacy, or speaking on raising children." And I thought, whatever topic it was, I had the other one in my mind.
Right.
But one of the great experiences of my life was doing that, recognizing that I already had enough in my head. I had enough general knowledge, enough experience of life, enough experience in all sorts of levels of life, and all the volunteer work and different things we moved the council to do, that I had a level of confidence that wasn't dependent on what was in front of me or paper or whatever. I could speak to it in a certain level, and that was a huge. It gave me confidence to be in lots of different environments. That eventually at council, at council you were brought into lots of different environments. I was on the leaders of the nonprofits in Philadelphia, and there were other organizations as I was part of that, really significant people in Philadelphia and significant clients that I had. Um, it became easy for me just to see them as people and me as just as a person, and open up and not feel like I have to prove anything. So there's some point in there that I had done enough public speaking, which when you first met me way back, I mean, I was probably speaking 2 or 3 times a week, and on TV once a week, and and all sorts of things. And um, I realized that no matter what happened, I had some resources inside myself, and that created a lot of security for me. And I have those resources even more than I've ever had them before, currently, except at my age, I sometimes I forget now, but I've been in front of people so long, I just simply say I forgot, and you know, it'll come
Right.
back to me,
Keep
and
going.
it's no big deal. People laugh and whatever. So that was a real transitional time in my life when I know I had done enough work that I could just I don't know what you want to call it, but it's like watching one of the great athletes that just
Yeah.
know that the shot's going in,
Yeah.
kind of thing, or that I can hit the baseball, or I can, whatever. So there was a confidence that grew out of that been pretty great. So I kind of did now can just kind of do what I enjoy and work with a lot of different types of people and
I
not
think
carry a
that's
lot of
really
anxiety.
powerful.
Yeah,
I think it's powerful because so many times I don't think people, even times I remember myself, not not recognizing how much that we have already within us, right?
right,
And it is those
right,
moments that you prove it to yourself, or you see it like, oh, I guess I did know more, or I really could have talked like for another 20 minutes on that particular topic if given the
absolutely,
opportunity. And
right.
and there's a way that I really like what you're saying, how it builds this security of like who you are and the value that you can provide to the world and to others. And
Right.
I think that's just phenomenal that you had that point. Because yeah, I do remember you were easily talking and speaking publicly on TV 2, 3 times, maybe 4 times a week. And it's interesting when I find myself in that situation where I could be on TV 1 or 2 times a week, on the radio, and even virtually speaking somewhere, where that has just been like just a part of my life. And
Yeah,
my kids joke with me and saying, "Daddy, you're famous." I'm like, "No, I'm not." But
right.
like, but how they see it and experience it is just so interesting, through their eyes of now feeling really secure about something that I do just on a normal basis.
I mean, think of your own foundation. You got a real foundation. You know what you're talking about. When people raise something that you don't know about, you can just say I don't know about it, or that's something I'll explore, and whatever. There's a level of security that comes out of it that I'm still working at. Goodness knows I can still hold insecurities at different points, but it's so much less than it used to be as a younger person. So it's a great thing, and but it took a long time. It took a long time to kind of feel that, hey, whatever environment I'm in, I can probably speak to some of that dynamic, and not feel like I'm trying to prove myself, kind of thing.
So a couple of things I'm curious about, and just knowing you and then knowing our relationship. I'll start there. When I graduated with my master's, I was particularly looking for mentors, and I fully believed at that time to go and seek and go after people that
Yeah,
can be
yeah,
of value. And I thought, as a young black man who's now a therapist, uh, that I should, reach out to other black men to be my guides. How do they navigate it? And it was hard for multiple sets of reasons to find people to connect with.
yeah.
And you and I had this connection, and how from my perspective you were always willing to make time. You were busy. You were doing a lot, and now in my own like more adult life, can see it even more of like being super busy, and
Mhm.
you made time. And I'm curious of what, and I know you not only did that for me but you did that for others, but what allowed you to make time for someone that was different, was younger, was another race, all these other things, but you stopped your schedule so that you could help support someone like me in my career? What allowed you to do that?
Well, I think that one of the most important factors is I realized that so many people did that for me. It was like paying forward
Yeah.
a little bit. I mean, literally, I had people pick me out of just, and my mother's included in this list, just pick me out of kind of a general kind of population, kind of general people, just people, and said, you can do this. You can have this happen. You can make this happen. In graduate school, and kind of a funny story that the graduate school that I was in was talking about, wanted to have a vote on who would be public speaking at the commencement address, and they said, we wanted to have a vote and whatever. And he's talking about this for about 20 minutes. And he says, heck with it. I don't think we'll have a vote. And I just want to thank Steve for volunteering to do that. And whatever. Of course, I didn't volunteer to do that. But you follow me on that?
Right.
I want to thank Steve for volunteering to do it. And we only want him to speak for about 20 minutes on this and that. And we're so great doing. I want everybody to give Steve a round of applause for volunteering to do this with, the 200 people that were in the group in my class, and coming in seminary. And I didn't want to do that, but he literally, this is a person that saw me again more than this. So I've tried to do that for people. But the other half of it was you, George. I'm not saying that for any reason to say you asked.
Yeah.
You get me on that? I mean, I think about how many people, I think about the times when I was afraid to ask, but I did that in the council. I mean, one of the reasons I was seen as someone who could run the council was Martin Goldberg, who was running it. I sought him out to be a mentor. You follow me? And he would sit in his office and say, I wonder why more people don't come to me. And I said, because you're scary.
Right.
And I knew he was scary, and he became a good friend. But I asked, I would you please, I need your help. You are smarter than I am. And you had I don't know where that's just a question where it came in your background of stuff that said, okay, whether it be Steve or somebody else, this is a person that can give me some good feedback and can give me some, feedback. And you said, would you help me? And when somebody asks, it's easy. And they're motivated and whatever. So I think it's a combination of it was done for me and a combination of you asked, because, almost anybody who asks, you find the time for it because, their efforts they're really going after it. So, let's be a part of that and have them, as you have, grown beyond me, in so many ways, and some of your national speaking and some of that stuff. But you asked. I mean, that's a full half of it. I don't mean to, if you hadn't asked, would I have supported you? Of course, like any student, and you would have been, 1,000 students I had or time. But you said, no. Do you have some time? Do you have an hour? And absolutely have an hour.
Yeah, it was turned into
of course,
our
I hope you got a couple of people that are doing that with you, because they're going to be lucky if they do. So,
unfortunately,
but I do recognize I would not have gotten there. And I mean mentors. I mean, starting at 3 years old, 4 years old, I could go to my next door neighbor, Max Smith, and he loved to put together radios back at the time. And there were kits for radios. And there was like, you put all the pieces out on the table and you find piece number 3 and it goes and connects with piece number 3 on the radio. Do you follow me that? And at 3 years old, I could find piece number 3 that or 4 years old, I knew 4 or 5, but he was mentoring me already to work together with him. Yeah. And when I wrote on this once, because I had mentors really from 4 years old on outside of my family.
Yeah.
But
I think that's great. And, I do appreciate that. And I give credit to some of the teachers in my life that had just influenced me along the way. And I think, probably shortly before that time, it was Dr. Phyllis Swint, who I remember pulling me aside and saying, I don't ask for help. And I think that was because I was used to, in my family context,
yeah,
my parents couldn't do so much. I got to a certain age, they couldn't even check my homework. They loved me, they cared for me, but it was on my own. I had that mindset. But it wasn't until I had someone who was willing to call me on it. And then I think from that point on, I was like, all right, I'm going to ask for help from whoever. And I was so appreciative that 1 hour turned into hours, throughout a course of a year to multiple years to now 20 plus years. The other thing I want to highlight before we wrap up is that you do a lot of work helping leaders in families and family businesses. And, you talk about seminary and being CEO and the work that you've done. How did that start to pull on you as one of your kind of core expertise to help family businesses?
Well, like most things, I was dragged into doing it. Kind of thinking about my role as kind of myopic. But the actual story is I had 2 Wharton professors who came to me and said, Steve, we're consulting these large family businesses, and family philanthropies, and we're just missing something. And I said, what do you mean? What are you missing? And he said, well, we just billed somebody $200,000 for a plan for the company and all the demographics for how they were going to grow the company and change roles of people and whatever. And we watched two brothers just rip them up. And they said, we want you to come and speak to a business seminar that we're going to there, and we want you to speak on psychological health and relational health. And I said, well, what does that have to do with business? I mean, what am I going to do? I'm going to be like a duck. No one's going to want to do this. And so, I went down with these guys, and they put me in front and said, we got one class that's going to be a little bit unique in terms of this. And I just started talking about relational health and how do you manage conflict, and how do you differentiate, and how do you not end up get rid of your own reactivity, or all the kinds of things you and I have talked about forever. And I found that it was an enormous appeal, that it was so much a part of that so many family businesses and family philanthropies weren't making it, not because it was a lousy business or a lousy vision for the company or a lousy marketing plan or whatever, or lousy investments. It was because brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers couldn't get along. Wow. And family branches couldn't get along. And so I started with them, and I'm still working with them, off and on and whatever, and just slowly met people of companies of all sizes, billion-dollar companies, and one truck, and one well-drinking truck, and some wonderful small families. And yeah. I've had enormous experience, wonderful experience meeting some of these people and the challenges they have. But the challenges are always the same from my vantage point: is how do you lead? How do you feel good about yourself? How do you break your own reactivity? How do you get out of the defenses? How do you have good communication? How can you do difference with people and have it be a good communication? And I found it to be a whole challenging career, of which I've had many failures and many wonderful, wonderful successes. And so that was how I got into it. I got in dragged because I had no notion that the relational educations that we've gotten were going to really apply to business and philanthropies. And of course, they apply a lot.
One of the reasons I love the work in the field is that it can apply in so many different places.
Exactly.
So I have four kind of last questions that I ask everyone. One is, what are you doing now? What are you working on now, and where you are in life?
So I am working on practicing more downtime, just being emotionally available to the people around me, being less frenetic. I started that very early, but it's still an ongoing, pattern for me to do that, because I want to go into my 80s and 90s in peace and stuff like that. So I'm just doing more reading and walking and hiking, and just time with Elizabeth and time with my grandchildren, and still always doing some meaningful work a couple of days a week with some large businesses and large family philanthropies, but slowly moving into my, early 70s and 80s, trying to just work on being my time to build something or to work 80-hour weeks is gone. So I want to kind of practice being older. That's what I'm literally practicing.
I like practice being older. As you've kind of, slowed down some of your work, this might be applied differently. But I always like to ask if there's somebody that you could work with, and maybe now it's more if it's someone you could have a conversation with, sit down and have dinner with, anybody, who would that be?
Oh, I think it would be I guess I'd like to sit down with Carl Jung and Barack Obama.
Why those
Carl
two?
Jung, Carl Jung, because I think he had some of those incredible insights into human behavior, and done so much of his reading and whatever. And Barack Obama, because I think he was one of the most differentiated leaders we've ever had. He lost it occasionally, kind of lost himself, but boy, I think he was one of the most differentiated people that we've had in a very long time in the leadership role. So those would be the two.
Oh, yeah, I could see that would be a really great and interesting conversation.
Exactly.
The last two questions deal with mental wellness, and I'm wondering for you, in all the work that you've done and for yourself and others, what does mental wellness mean for you?
It means you can look at the good and the bad and the ugly. You can look at your strengths and weaknesses and like both. Allow yourself just to be a human being. It means, as Viktor Frankl said, between the stimulus and response, you have choices to not just end up reacting to the world, but to really, when you have some negative stimulus coming towards you, you have more options, you have choices of how to respond. And as I get more mature, I have more choices than just simply getting reactive, or, somebody hits me, I don't hit them back. If you follow, I have more choices of how to respond. So it's a part of that, but most of it is just a little bit of just self-care, self-love, self-acceptance.
Yeah.
Not in a humble way, just to recognize that, I've done okay and I feel good about it. And I hope I have some life to go in that, but you always want to improve, but there's a level of acceptance now that I didn't have as a kid, when I was hungry and stupid.
I know that feeling. And the last kind of main question I like to ask is, what mental wellness advice would you give to your younger self? And that could be as early as yesterday or any time in the past.
I would have learned to do more balance of life early on. I would have learned it earlier. Yeah. I learned it early enough. It wasn't like I had to wait till I was 70 to figure it out, but I would have learned it a lot earlier. But I was trying to compensate for so many insecurities early on that probably I had to work those hours and be motivated and go after it at some level at that point. But I think I would have learned balance of life earlier on. And I thank goodness that I have Elizabeth and different people that forced me to learn balance of life. I mean, there's decisions they made that said, no, you will be taking care of the kids blank and this time and this kind of, that forced me to calm it down. And I thank God for all of that. But I think I could have internally found more balance of life early on. Yeah. I would have recognized how unimportant some of the drivenness I had was, not completely. I'm glad I was driven, but some of it, I could have so balanced earlier on in a little better way,
Yeah, Steve, I really appreciate, your time and your willingness to be here, all that you've shared. I feel like I've learned lots of new things. Even when I think I know a lot, I continue to learn more, and I appreciate. And I think that you offered a lot of really great thoughts and ideas and wisdom that I think is helpful for me, and I think will be helpful for others. So I really appreciate it. And
well, I'm looking to a lot. I'm looking for a lot more years of the mentoring we do for each other. So I look forward to a lot of years going ahead, George.
So I do too, and I appreciate the paying it forward as you've done. What was done for you, and you've done for me, and I've been able to do for others. It is definitely something that I value, and even as you talked about, like being aware of those insecurities that sometimes trip us up, but if we just settle in, there's ways that we could see the best in ourselves. And
so blessings.
Thank you. And I was going to say, the last thing I would say is there anything you want to say before we kind of end today in our time?
No, it's just what a pleasure it's been to know you. And I look forward to, as I said, hopefully I've got lots of years left. I know you got lots of years left, but I hope in my early 70s, I got lots of years left, but you never know. So I'll take advantage of them as I go along.
And I look forward to sharing, our families together and supporting and connecting with each other. So thank you for joining me today.
You're very welcome, George. What a pleasure. Take care. See you.
Wow. What an incredible ride we just went on with another great member of the Leapcast community. I appreciate you listening and hope you got some tangible value from the episode. Please let us know what you think by leaving a comment, rating, and review. As always, please don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. This is Dr. George James, and I'll see you next time.